The way to oppose Trump is you offer people something else. He ran to the left of Hillary Clinton on foreign policy. He wanted to end our foreign wars, according to his rhetoric in his campaign. He wanted to give everybody health care. Remember, everyone's going to get health care and it's going to be cheaper. That was his plan. Of course, he's doing the exact opposite.
Yeah.
So,
but who does the thing they say they're going to do? Whoever
does the thing.
Who's ever done it? No one.
Yeah. Freaking politicians. But then I came across this article on 538.com. Go ahead and show it. Apparently that's not true. The article says politicians do keep their promises most of the time. The author based it off a study looking at campaign promises over a period of 50 years. During those 50 years, presidents at least attempted to fulfill around 2/3 of their campaign promises. But why am I even bringing this up? Well, when I think of American presidents who actually kept their campaign promises, the first one that pops in my head is the 11th president, James K. Polk. He had such a huge impact on the United States, yet most Americans today haven't even heard of him. He's so obscure that my song about him is one of my worst performing videos on YouTube. It has just like 4,000 views.
He was decisive, didn't care what others said about him.
Okay, so maybe it's a bad song, but still, James Polk is underrated. In this video, I'm going to give him some much needed recognition. Polk was born literally in a log cabin near Pineville, North Carolina on November 2nd, 1795, the oldest of 10 kids. When he was 10, his family picked up everything and moved west to the Tennessee frontier. They took the 500-mile journey by wagon, and it sucked. James's dad did well in Tennessee, living the American dream, eventually owning thousands of acres of farmland and lots of slaves. Polk was sickly growing up. At 17, he had horrible gallstones and had to have them surgically removed. This was before anesthesia, okay? They cut open his body and removed the gallstones while he was completely conscious, strapped to a table and holding his dad's hand. But the good news is his overall health recovered quite a bit after this. At 18, he barely knew how to read or write, but he really kicked it into gear at that age, studying his butt off and becoming proficient in English, Greek, and Latin. He ended up graduating from the University of North Carolina with first honors in both mathematics and classics. Next, Polk studied law and found himself becoming more and more interested in politics. He was always a fan of Thomas Jefferson, but he was quickly becoming inspired by a family friend named Andrew Jackson. By the time Polk was in his 20s, Jackson was a war hero who was looking to become president. After being a lawyer for a bit, Polk aligned himself with Jackson when he ran for the Tennessee legislature in 1823. He won that election and became popular in Tennessee, becoming a representative in Congress for Tennessee's 6th District 2 years later. While in Congress, Polk was one of Andrew Jackson's biggest supporters, earning him the nickname Young Hickory. You know, since Jackson was Old Hickory. So clever, I know. After Jackson became president in 1829, Polk was right with Jackson on every major decision, including the decision not to renew the charter of the Second Bank of the United States. His support made Polk one of the early leaders of the newly formed Democratic Party. Polk's colleagues elected him to Speaker of the House in 1835, and he greatly expanded that role. In 1839, Tennessee residents elected him governor. However, he lost his re-election bids the next 2 times, as many blamed the Democratic Party for the economic depression of the late 1830s and early 1840s. In 1844, Polk became the first dark horse presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, meaning at the beginning of the Democratic Party National Convention, no one thought he had a chance, but by the end of it, he was their guy, mostly because Polk wanted to annex the country of Texas, adding it to the United States. Yes, it was a country at the time. So in 1844, it ended up being Polk versus Henry Clay, the Whig Party candidate who had a history of losing presidential elections. Sorry, Clay. During his campaign, Polk made no effort to hide his ambitions. He was very clear.
He wanted Texas, Oregon, California, yeah, all of it.
That's right, he was a firm believer in manifest destiny, or the belief that the United States expanding across the entire continent was the right thing to do and destined to happen. Polk wanted to expand the country's border whenever and wherever possible, and most Americans seemed to agree with him. Polk promised he was only running for one term, but if elected during those 4 years, he would, number 1, cut tariffs. Number 2, recreate an independent U.S. Treasury. Number 3, add some or all of Oregon Territory to the United States. And number 4, somehow get California and New Mexico from Mexico and add it to the United States, or put another way,
James Polk reduced the tariff. James Polk freed the treasury. James Polk acquired new land.
These were 4 ridiculously ambitious goals that few thought Polk could actually pull off, especially in 4 years. Well, I have a video about the election of 1844. Yeah, so go ahead and check out that video and come back. Welcome back. So as you just saw in that video you just watched, it was a very close race, but Polk won the election, becoming the youngest president in American history up to that point. And so Polk had those 4 promises, right? So if you could please just go ahead and put them back up on the screen for me, please. Put them back on the screen. Thank you. All right, so yes, number 1 was cut tariffs. Yep, even though it was a hard-fought victory, Polk signed the Walker Tariff of 1846 after his vice president, George Dallas, cast the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. The Walker Tariff moved rates down to 25%. It was one of the lowest tariffs in American history. Success. All right, so number 2 was recreate an independent U.S. Treasury. Well, this one was easier, and I should probably note that in 1844, the Democrats took back over their majority in Congress. So yeah, Congress brought back the independent treasury, and Polk approved it, of course. This was a system for the federal government to take care of the money supply in a way that was independent of banks and financial systems. It was a solid system that ended up lasting until the Federal Reserve System replaced it 67 years later. Number 3 was add some or all of Oregon Territory to the United States. So Great Britain and the United States had both occupied the territory since 1818, but the majority of settlers there were American, not British. So Polk had the upper hand with negotiations. When Polk and Britain started talking about what to do with Oregon, Polk said he wanted all the territory, all the way up to 5440. This was totally a bluff, but it scared Britain, who did not want to get into another war with the United States. Instead, on June 15th, 1846, they worked out a deal and split the territory in 2, right down the middle. Britain got north of the 49th parallel, and the United States got south of it. That easy. Polk almost single-handedly got the United States what would become the states of Oregon, Idaho, and Washington. 3 states with lots of resources and control of the Columbia River drainage basin. And number 4, somehow get New Mexico and California from Mexico and add it to the United States. This would not be easy, but Polk knew if he wanted California and New Mexico, it first had to be through Texas. He had already helped get Texas to join the United States. It became the 28th state on December 29th, 1845. But there was still a border dispute between Texas and Mexico. Texas, and Polk, I should add, said its southern border was the Rio Grande, but Mexico said the border was further north at the Nueces River. Polk sent troops there just north of the Rio Grande in the disputed territory, also sending a dude named John Slidell to settle the border dispute, as well as negotiate to straight up buy California. However, the majority of Mexicans weren't having it. In April 1846, Mexican troops crossed the Rio Grande and killed 11 American soldiers. According to Mexico, the Americans had invaded their land. Well, Polk didn't see it that way. On May 11th, 1846, Polk went before Congress to passionately ultimately argue for the United States to go to war with Mexico, saying they were the invaders who, quote, shed the blood of our fellow citizens on our own soil, unquote. Yeah, Congress declared war on Mexico, a war that became known as the Mexican-American War. In a war that lasted just under 2 years, the United States straight up kicked butt throughout most of it. At the end of it, American forces led by Major General Winfield Scott were able to overcome extremely difficult resistance from the Mexican army just outside Mexico City, the capital. After Scott was able to capture Mexico City, the war was over. While some Americans talked about taking over all of Mexico during peace negotiations, ultimately the United States acquired just the northern half of Mexico. We're talking a huge amount of land here. Look at all that. So yeah, James Polk, he got his way. So here's the United States without Polk being president. Here's the United States with Polk being president. Good golly, Polk. The country grew by more than a third, and manifest destiny seemed fulfilled. All 4 promises kept. And even though he had all 4 checked off, he didn't stop working. He was a workaholic up until his last day in office, when he signed a bill creating the Department of the Interior. Also, as promised, Polk did not run for a second term. He retired and went on a trip across the South. While in New Orleans, Polk contracted cholera, a horrible bacterial infection of the small intestine. Polk had serious stomach issues, but shrugged it off as he had stomach issues for most of his life. Well, the sickness did not go away. He ended up dying from cholera on June 15th, 1849, exactly 3 years after getting Oregon and just 3 months after leaving the presidency. He was just 53. A few months ago, I released a top 10 greatest presidents in American history video, and you may remember that James Polk did not make that list. And mostly because I just think he was one ruthless dude. I mean, he may have kept his campaign promises to the American people, which is pretty gnarly, but he straight up misled Congress to get them to declare war on Mexico. I mean, he said that Mexico invaded the United States and killed Americans on American soil, but Mexico said that the Americans were the ones who invaded them and they were just defending their land. So, you know, he was kind of a jerk, and despite what you say about that, there's no doubt that he was extremely important to American history, and he is just ridiculously underrated. And he doesn't get the credit he deserves. Probably because he was a jerk. I want to give a shout out to John Johnson, who suggested this topic, and I took it not only because it was good, but also because he is a George Washington level supporter on Patreon. YouTube is taking down my videos more and more. They're demonetizing my videos more and more. And so I'm realizing that Patreon is becoming much more important for making this much more worthwhile. So thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. It means so much. And if you can't support, don't worry. If you want to, just look me up on Patreon, search Mr. Beat. But thank you for watching. Yes, you. With the green shirt on.